In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Adorable Will, I want to pray these titles, but I am unable to do it. Come and do it with me, and I'll do everything well.
Jesus in Mary, I praise you, and I thank you, one with Luisa, the little daughter of Jesus' will. Luisa, always at work with Jesus, sewing little drops of light together. Luisa, one who is inseparable from Jesus, who he nourishes with his own flames. Luisa, filtered through the most pure light of the divine will. Luisa, fully exposed to the rays of the burning and eternal sun. Luisa, all deified in God. Luisa, in who Jesus finds his true return that the host does not know how to give him. Luisa, Jesus' most faithful company. Luisa, whose acts extend themselves around Jesus. Luisa, whose acts imprison Jesus in a noble, divine prison. Luisa, the soul who Jesus lives his real life in. Luisa, the soul in who Jesus feels his, as if he were inside his celestial royal palace. Luisa, in whose heart Jesus delights and feels the purest joys. Luisa, whose volition is one with the volition of Jesus. Luisa, daughter of Jesus' supreme volition, in whose soul he writes the law of his will and the good that it brings. Luisa, who Jesus made a more perfect image of himself. Luisa, Jesus' beloved daughter, in who he began a new sanctity so noble and divine, the Fiat voluntas tua, on earth as it is in heaven. Luisa, Jesus' beloved daughter, in who he centralized all the states of mind which have occurred until now along the path of sanctity. Luisa, in who Jesus wants to repeat his life and all that he did in the redemption. Luisa, Jesus' dear little one, who he chose little. Luisa, Jesus' little one. Luisa, another little one among all generations, who Jesus chose to make the divine will reign on earth as it does in heaven. Luisa, the most little one, who Jesus' wisdom calls out of nothing. Luisa, little one at the head of the Fiat voluntas tua, on earth as it is in heaven. Luisa, little one through whom Jesus was to make man return to his beginning, to his origin, to his lost nobility, to the bonds of his will. Luisa, chosen to be the first to live in the eternal will. Luisa, in who Jesus bound all the relations of creation, and who he lived with no split of wills. Luisa, the littlest that the triune God delivered in creation. Luisa, who bound her will tightly to the triune gods, and lived together with them through that breath with which they created man. Luisa, who the divine will maintains fresh and beautiful. Luisa, who forms the triune God's smile and amusement, and who they can do whatever they want with. Luisa, who cries for her brothers and compensates the triune God for all and for each one of all the wrong they have done. Luisa, one whose tears will be powerful, and through her the triune God will open, with the first channel of redemption, the second channel of the Fiat voluntas tua on earth as it is in heaven. Luisa, little fortunate one. Luisa, the little one. Luisa, little one who is head of the wing beside the throne of God, of the Fiat voluntas tua on earth as it is in heaven. Luisa, Jesus' little daughter of the divine will. Luisa, Jesus' little daughter who, with our Blessed Mother, holds hands before the divine throne and embraces the eternal divine majesty with their little arms. Luisa, with the help of our Blessed Mother, will snatch from the eternal love the Fiat voluntas tua on earth as it is in heaven. Jesus and Mary, I thank you and I esteem you, one with Luisa, Jesus' poor little one. Luisa, little daughter of Jesus. Luisa, little soul whose task it is to embrace all generations in order to receive all the acts of the supreme will that other creatures rejected. Luisa, who Jesus chose because she was little and who keeps small. Luisa, who makes Jesus smile with her childish things. Luisa, poor little child. Luisa, true newborn of the supreme will. Luisa, who Jesus gave the sublime lessons of his will. Luisa, who reties all the broken bonds between the human will and the divine. Luisa, who lives as though needed with the divine will. Luisa, Jesus' little one, chosen by him for the mission of his will. Luisa, who lives in the fiat in which she was created, who Jesus lets know the story of his eternal will. Luisa, who must do for the work of the Fiat voluntas tua what Jesus' mama did for the work of redemption. Luisa, who makes all the acts of Jesus' will in each creature her own. Luisa, who repays Jesus' will in the name of all and forms in herself all the necessary food to nourish all generations with the food of his will. Luisa, who as second mother prepares the food for their children, imitating the celestial mama. Luisa, Jesus' little daughter, his newborn of the divine will. Luisa, who Jesus holds in his arms and allows her no other food than the breath of his will. Luisa, the newborn of Jesus' will, the most beautiful, most dear, the most precious thing that has been delivered in creation until now. Luisa, Jesus' newborn. Luisa, true newborn daughter of Jesus' will. Luisa, who the divine will marked with the crosses of light. Luisa, whose cross has been Jesus' will. Luisa, true newborn of Jesus' will, to whom he entrusts the secrets, the joys, and the pains of it, as to a faithful daughter. Luisa, who uniting to Jesus' acts may open the heavens to make the divine will descend upon earth, to make it known, received, and loved. Luisa, always Jesus' newborn of his will. Luisa, who Jesus braided together with his will. Luisa, who Jesus raised above all things. Luisa, creature in whom the true reigning of Jesus' will must have its origin and beginning. Luisa, the channel to make the divine will known. Luisa, the instrument to make the divine will known. Luisa, the one whom Jesus' goodness has chosen as origin and beginning of such a great good. Luisa, who Jesus loved and kept sacrificed for all and for each one. Luisa, the newborn of Jesus' will, who was born in his will. Luisa, whose office is to fly in the eternal volition. Luisa, first newborn daughter of God's will, who goes before the supreme majesty to give it all the love and homages of all and each one. Luisa, little daughter of the celestial Father, who came to his throne with all his children on her lap, to place them on his divine lap, so that he may bind and retie once again that will that they had broken from him. Jesus and Mary, I esteem you and I honor you, one with Luisa, who is little, who takes on the commitment to satisfy the celestial Father for all. Luisa, Jesus' little one. Luisa, firstborn daughter of God's will, whose task is to seal and glaze all human acts with the acts of the divine will. Luisa, firstborn daughter of God's will, who adds the third seal of their will upon all human acts, to the first and the second, in order to obtain the coming of the kingdom of the divine will upon earth. Luisa, Jesus' daughter, who goes around over all the human acts of creatures, who penetrates into the hearts, bringing each heartbeat the heartbeat of the divine will, each thought the kiss and knowledge of the divine will. Luisa, Jesus' daughter, who impresses the omnipotent Fiat in every word of creatures and invades everything. Luisa, Jesus' daughter, who overwhelms everyone with the divine will. Luisa, creature who receives in every instant the currents of grace, of light, of love. Luisa, the creature who remains in order with her Creator. Luisa, Jesus' little newborn, to whom he makes known the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin. Luisa, one to whom it is always Christmas, as Jesus is conceived and develops his life in her act. Luisa, beloved daughter of Jesus' will. Luisa, newborn of Jesus' eternal volition, who he calls and wants under the press of his divine will. Luisa, daughter who has an eternal bond with Jesus. Luisa, in who an eternal vein flows. Luisa, who brings the whole of creation before Jesus, and in the name of all, gives him the return of their duties. Luisa, newborn of Jesus' will, his little daughter, who was the first one to cry out together with Jesus, non mea voluntas, sed tua fiat. Luisa, who Jesus gave all the fruits of his passion as gift. Luisa, who Jesus keeps the contract of his will deposited in. Luisa, the little boat of Jesus' will. Luisa, Jesus' little boat who crosses the sea of the divine will continuously and closes eternity in each of her heartbeats, and acts and connects them to the eternal heartbeat and act. Luisa, Jesus' little boat, whose task it is to cross the immense sea of Jesus' will, and give the triune God the return of all that comes from them. Luisa, like that sweet little breeze bringing refreshment to Jesus' fire. Luisa, the soul who follows the motion of Jesus' will and takes flight in his eternal volition. Luisa, one who has the wings of abandonment in Jesus and flies over all, both in heaven and on earth. Luisa, who enters the sphere of eternity and wanders around in the midst of the three divine persons. Luisa, who penetrates into the three divine persons' most intimate hiding places and is aware of their secrets and their beatitudes. Luisa, the moving little wheel that lives in the divine will. Luisa, who will participate in all that is contained in the circle of eternity. Luisa, the soul whose acts remain like an eternal and divine seed. Luisa, the soul who the circle of eternity will pour upon so much that the whole celestial Jerusalem will remain stupefied. Luisa, Jesus' little daughter in his divine will. Luisa, little one who is before all. Luisa, little one inside of Jesus' womb. Luisa, one who pleads, repairs, and unites God's will with hers and with that of all. Luisa, one who receives all the reflections of the divinity in order to copy them in herself. Luisa, who has a thought that belongs to all. Luisa, who has a word, a work, a step, a love which may be of all and for all in God's will. Jesus and Mary, I honor you and I cherish you, one with Luisa. In the divine will, she goes behind everyone, takes them on her lap, and brings them all into the womb of the divine majesty. Luisa, little daughter of God's will, whose acts benefit all. Luisa, whose office is little one in God's divine will. Luisa, resigned and who loves suffering, who Jesus feels as though regenerated within his heart. Luisa, first one to live in the divine volition. Luisa, whose gift, whose grace, whose mission is of having been called in a way all special and new to live in Jesus' will. Luisa, Jesus' little newborn of his will. Luisa, one who wins over God and makes God give out gifts so great as to astonish heaven and earth. Luisa, creature chosen by Jesus, to whom he gave as a gift the divine will. Luisa, in whom Jesus established the law of his will. Luisa, who, in flying over the whole of creation, brought the pure joys of creation to the feet of the divinity. Luisa, Jesus' dear daughter. Luisa, in whom Jesus wrote in the depth of her soul. Luisa, one in whom Jesus placed within her the depths of the eternal law of his will. Luisa, who, in one act in the divine will, takes heaven and earth as though in her power. Luisa, together with the divine will, she flows in every affection, heartbeat, thought, and all the rest that creatures do. Luisa, who flows in every act of her Creator. Luisa, who has her little place in every good that Jesus does and every point of eternity. Luisa, dear to Jesus and inseparable from him. Luisa, the true faithful of Jesus' will and never leaves it alone. Luisa, first who Jesus carries out all the works of living in his will. Luisa, whose interior Jesus binds within the unending light of his will. Luisa, whose human will takes its first place in the divine will. Luisa, whose will Jesus reorders in the divine will. Luisa, in whom Jesus places in current the gifts, the suspended graces which are there in his will. Luisa, in whom the light of the divine will flows. Luisa, who lived of the reflections of God. Luisa, who carried all creation on her lap at the feet of the eternal majesty. Luisa, who ascended to heaven, descended upon earth, and ascended again to bring all generations to love the eternal majesty for all, and to make him loved by all. Luisa, who absorbed the likeness of her Creator within herself. Luisa, who is embellished, enriched, enlarged, so as to be able to take everyone and bring all to the eternal majesty. Luisa, who draws so much love from the eternal majesty as to be able to love them for all. Luisa, in who the eternal majesty finds all their love which they delivered in creation, their satisfaction, their contentment, and return of their works. Luisa, for who the eternal majesty's love is so great that she becomes what they are by nature. Luisa, who the eternal majesty pours everything into. Luisa, who the eternal majesty pours so much as to make her overflow, forming divine rivers and seas around her. Luisa, who sees the eternal majesty descends into to amuse themselves, admire their works with love, and feeling fully glorified. Luisa, who Jesus blesses and who penetrates heaven and earth to go through everyone. Jesus and Mary, I cherish you and I love you, one with Luisa, who multiplies Jesus' life to give him the great honor as of many divine lives. Luisa, whose love and acts, being filled with a divine virtue, makes Jesus' life arise. Luisa, in who Jesus placed the yeast of his will, formed the preparation and laid the foundations to open heaven to new graces and new currents, and to dispose the supreme majesty to concede the greatest grace, that the divine will be known on earth and live in the midst of creatures. Luisa, who Jesus calls and raises between heaven and earth, to make her run in his will, to prepare the act opposite to the evils that flood the earth. Luisa, who prepares good and tries to conquer man with Jesus' love, to stop him in his vertiginous race and give him the light of Jesus' will. Luisa, who surrounded Jesus with the shadow of his works, of his fiat, and of his love. Luisa, Jesus' little one. Luisa, who Jesus places in the center of his will, so that her sleep will be an embankment for his justice. Luisa, victim. Luisa, who Jesus placed in the center of his will, in the state of victim, and her sleep, sufferings, prayer is always an embankment for his justice. Luisa, the littlest of all, just newborn. Luisa, who the enemy cannot approach. Luisa, everything that happens within her serves the work that the divine will has its dominion and may come triumphantly to reign in the midst of men. Luisa, who Jesus is posted within, and from her interior, he looks at what the world is doing. Luisa, in who Jesus finds the air of his will, and can be there with the decorum that befits his person. Luisa, where the divine will finds its company. Luisa, where the divine will is loved. Luisa, where the divine will carries out the good it contains. Luisa, the soul in whom Jesus finds his sanctity, his light, his very will in acting in her. Luisa, in finding his own things within her, Jesus finds himself with honors and decorum, just as he was in his humanity. Luisa, with the garment of her soul, Jesus finds himself covered. Luisa, in whom Jesus lives as in his own center. Luisa, out of regard for her, Jesus spares many evils and chastisements. Luisa, in whom Jesus sees his will and its fortress. Luisa, the soul who is Jesus' amusement and contentment. Luisa, on whom Jesus impresses with his touch one more shade of his beauty, his love, his sanctity, all of his qualities. Luisa, being in her for Jesus, is like being in heaven. Luisa, in her, Jesus finds the same adoration of the divine persons, his will, his love. Luisa, in whom Jesus portrays his image. Luisa, to whom Jesus teaches the most high and sublime doctrines. Luisa, who Jesus gives love and wants love from. Luisa, the soul in whom Jesus takes refuge. Luisa, the soul where Jesus finds his power to defend him. Luisa, the soul where Jesus finds his love, loving him. Luisa, the soul where Jesus finds his peace to give him rest. Luisa, the soul where Jesus finds everything he wants. Luisa, who is everything for Jesus, and she is everything for him. Luisa, whose one flight in the divine will is enough to place her and Jesus in accord in love that will flow for the good of their brothers.
You have reached the end of Day 12 of the Titles of Luisa. Fiat.